Recording. Today we're going to be talking about ideology. I'm Jack Schumann.
And I'm Rowan Moore.
First up is
The role of government. Now, this was a time when there was a population boom. The industrial, what, bro, what just happened?
wait, did it go back?
It like shot around.
Hold on. You want to start from the beginning?
Yeah.
Today we're going to be talking about ideologies during the period of 1868 to 1898. I'm Jack Schumann.
I'm Rowan Moore. So first, we're going to be talking about the role of government. So during this time, industrial capitalism was king, and there was a shift in how the government was run post Reconstruction. So, first off, government subsidies and grants. So, these have always been a thing. And during this time, they were kind of contested because while they were useful, giving money to railroad companies, um, they were also used a lot of times for corruption, which was a big theme during this time. Tariffs were another point of discussion. The Republicans were in favor of a protective tariff, which often caused reactionary tariffs from other countries. It did protect banks and big business, but it hurt small farmers. Um, and then part of that was also easy and hard money. Same sort of deal. Hard money was favored by banks and big business because it helped prevent inflation. And that's basically using the gold standard and um, gold backing our currency, while easy is being able to print more, which would increase inflation, make it easier to borrow, pay back loans. Laissez-faire was a belief during this time that was widespread throughout the government, mostly within the Republican Party, and it's sort of started to go away towards the end of this period. And it was basically the belief that the free market would allow the America to thrive the best they could. So this meant while they would give money to these companies, they wouldn't regulate how they would pay their workers, how they would operate. They believed that it would basically work its way out. And there were people who disagreed with this, especially unions, and there were other groups. The Democrats fought against this. Patronage was basically like the spoils system during Jackson, and this was the idea that when someone got elected, they would put basically their friends, their supporters in, which was hugely corrupt, and it was big. Stalwarts were the supporters of patronage, and um, half breeds, which were named after being half Republican, was the people they were against patronage. And I just realized I have easy versus hard money on here twice.
It's all good.
All right, well, immigration. This was another contested point. You know what, Jack? I feel like we should just run through the whole thing and just try to get a sense of it, and then we
Yeah,
can
yeah,
really
yeah.
get polished. Because I
That's
was
a
kind of
good.
like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
immigration was another hotly contested issue during this time with a lot of
Oh,
27.5 million immigrants coming in. Um, so how the government would respond, and a lot of times it was in favor of those who were already living in the U.S. With things like the Chinese Exclusion Act. And
today we're going to be talking about ideologies in the Gilded Age. I'm Jack Schumann, and with me is
Rowan Moore.
first up.
So first, we're going to be talking about the role of government during this era. So one of the most hotly contested things was government subsidies. So one argument for the government subsidies was that they would lead to economic growth. A lot of them were given to the railroads, which would be able to transport goods, ideas, and expand the economics of the country. But some of the negatives were that often they would have poor construction on the land that they were given. And then they would also lead to corruption because these grants would be given to people and it would just end up in this cycle of favors. Tariffs was another hotly contested issue. Protective tariffs, which were often favored by Republicans, would protect banks and big businesses, but they would hurt the little guys and they would also cause other countries to raise tariffs in response. Easy versus hard money was the debate. Basically, easy money is money that's easy to print, and hard money is hard to print. So the harder it is to make money, it's going to make inflation a lot more difficult to rise, but it's also going to make it harder to pay back loans. And inflation will help people like farmers who have a lot of debt and they need support. Laissez-faire was the ideology often favored by Republicans. That basically was the free market idea. That was the idea that if you let the market operate on its own, it'll do its best work. And that's basically they were given money to do stuff, but they didn't tell them how to run their business. And this is what often led to corruption and poor working conditions for those who were actually in these businesses. Patronage was a big issue during this time. And that was basically the idea that when somebody when that person became part of the government, then the people who supported them would also be given positions. And this led to a lot of corruption. And in the government, instead of working on actual issues, people would be redoing favors. And a lot of people thought that they were owed stuff that they weren't actually fit for. Immigration was another hotly contested issue. 27.5 million immigrants came in during this period. And a lot of the times the government tried to support the people who were already living in America. And then education, they also gave a lot of money to universities, schools like Vanderbilt University, and then they also supported universal education as a whole. Political parties were another thing that changed. So the Democrats, they came from the South. Post Reconstruction, they were obviously a lot weaker, but once Hayes came in and Reconstruction kind of ended and they were able to get that Southern vote back, one strategy they used was political machines, which were usually in big northern cities. And those were used to gain votes by giving people food and shelter in return for their vote. And then they were also more for state and local control, and they were against civil rights in the South. They were for Jim Crow and segregation. Another thing that they believed was it was liberty was more important than moral help. Like they didn't want to help farmers; they wanted to give people as much freedom as possible. Republicans, they were the dominant party at the time. They were split between the stalwarts and the half breeds, which the stalwarts were for patronage and the half breeds were against it. They were that kind of more traditional, business focused, economy leading party during the time. So they really wanted America to grow on its own. They didn't try to really try to interfere with how the economy was working at the time. And they also believed in a protective tariff and hard money, which would protect the banks and the big business. And they were really focused on the industrial side of the U.S. And the populists were kind of a response to that as farmers who were really not doing well at the time due to new technology, which lowered the how much crops were worth. Also, the new trains were making it expensive to transport these crops, and tariffs were hurting them at the same time. And loan practices were also giving them a hard time. So this party was created to kind of support them when they didn't really have any support. And one thing they believed in was this easy money idea. If easy money was able to be printed or made, then money would be worth less and they could repay those loans that were sort of unfairly pushed against them. And then the Omaha platform was basically this platform that would help support the farmers. Part of this was storage. Part of this was getting rid of private banks and making it more federal, which would give them more regulation so that they could give them more support. Another thing was federal loans, which could help, and there would be less corruption, and it would just be more fair overall. And the Greenback Party was similar as the easy money idea, where money would be printed, therefore causing inflation, and there was a whole thing with the banks. Troops. Okay, so Hayes was elected, even though he lost the popular vote. The Compromise of 1877. He became president, and he removed the troops from the South. He ushered in this era of corruption, even though Grant sort of started it. Garfield was assassinated by a stalwart who believed he deserved to be given a position that he wasn't. And Arthur came in and started kind of going against the Republican Party. He created this new system of civil service, which would pick people based on merit rather than favors. He also expanded the Navy and uh, kind of went against the idea of the protective tariff, which the Republicans supported. Cleveland, he was a Democrat who took land away from lumber and cattle businesses that had gained it fraudulently. He he created this interstate commerce, which basically said that the federal government controls commerce, not the states. And Harrison, his Congress was the first to have $1 billion budget, and he used that to increase tariffs. He used that to use it on antitrust, and also he bought a huge supply of silver, which made gold more valuable because there was so much more silver.
Moving on to reforms in response of industry. So during this time period, the Gilded Age, the America was undergoing rapid industrialization. And with that came serious social and economic challenges. Workers and farmers alike began to organize to fight for their rights. So specifically, there were union strikes. Industrial workers were facing brutal consequences or brutal conditions, long hours, low wages, and dangerous working environments. In response, unions formed to protect their rights and push for better working conditions. Strikes became a powerful tool for workers to demand change. They often faced violent backlashes from employers and the government. One of the earliest large scale strikes, for example, was the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. Eventually, these unions led to actual working laws. Meanwhile, farmers were facing their own set of challenges, falling crop prices, high transportation costs due to railroad monopolies and unfair loan practices, pushed many farmers into debt and poverty. The populist movement, as Rowan talked about, grew um, in response to these sort of frustrations. On the economic ideas, the movement of populism and other social movements led to the rise of new economic ideas. Some workers and reformers embraced socialism, which advocated for greater government control over the industries to protect the right of laborers. Meanwhile, others supported single tax theory, which promoted by Henry George. This idea aimed to reduce inequality by taxing the value of land. Mucking and urban reform. Journalists known as muckrators, believe that's how you pronounce it, played a key role in exposing corruption and social injustice. Writers like Upton Sinclair and Ida Tarbell revealed the harsh realities of industrial life and corporate greed. Their work raised public awareness and fueled um, demands for reform. One example could even be like The Jungle Book, which was pictures of meat factories in Chicago. The Greenback Party, which Rowan talked a little bit about, um, also gained support. Now, finally, there was a growing role of women. They were increasingly becoming active in social and political reforms. Leaders like France Willard and Jane Addams advocated for their issues ranging from suffrage to labor rights and education. Many women joined organizations like Women's Christian Temperance Union, which linked the fight for social reform to the sort of broader movement of women's rights. Now, on to political changes. During this time period, there was a lot of political gridlock despite high amounts of political engagement, which kind of made people believe that the system didn't work. While all these social and economic movements gained traction, the political systems seemed to fail. So there was this growing frustration among ordinary Americans. So farmers in particular were fed up with the system as as they saw it was dominated by these big banks and powerful corporations. Think your Rockefellers. They formed the populist movement, which we've talked about, to advocate for policies that would protect their livelihoods. Their demands included breaking up monopolies, preventing land grabs by large companies, and introducing higher taxes on the wealthy to reduce economic inequality. So there was this anti-big bank and economic inequality. At the heart of the populism reform was strong opposition to the big banks. Farmers and small business owners argued that the banking system was rigged to benefit the wealthy elite and monopolies. Now, moving on to sort of some of the immigration of this time, there was a lot of immigration dating back as far back as 1848. This is when Chinese migration really started to ramp up. And by 1880, over 200,000 Chinese laborers had moved to the United States. Now, whenever there's a large amount of immigration from some specific foreign group, there's going to be social backlash. So, people who had lived here for a long time, who called themselves Native Americans, not to be confused with indigenous people, the arrival of the Chinese laborers led to anti-immigration sentiment. They began to take jobs in industries like mining, and there were reforms like the foreign miner tax of 1852 in California, which targeted Chinese miners and effectively discouraged their participation in the industry. In response to this reform, they moved to working on railroads. Now, the railroad job conditions were so bad that in 1866, Chinese workers organized a revolt to protest. The anti-Chinese sentiment continued to grow because they were taking jobs, culminating in the Chinese Exclusionary Acts in 1882. Now, this legislation banned Chinese immigration and was effective into the 20th century. During the same time period, there was also significant internal immigration within the United States, where people after the Civil War were looking to the western frontier. See the presentation on Western Frontier to learn more. This was incentivized from legislation such as the Homestead Act of 1862. Now, this covers ideologies. Thank you for listening. All right, I think that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it was I